the Fraser Institute has released a study on how the new Ottawa-Alberta implementation agreement will impact Canada's competitiveness with our American neighbors. Joining us from Calgary, actually from Toronto, to chat about this is Economist Dr. Jack Mintz. He is the President's Fellow of the School of Public Policy at the University of Calgary and the author of the study. Welcome to BCN, Dr. Mintz. Great to have you.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you.
Yeah, you're so welcome. Okay. So the new Ottawa-Alberta implementation agreement, this MOU, has a lot of people excited about the future of oil and gas, especially Premier Danielle Smith. But this bed of roses apparently has some thorns in it. And one of the biggest thorns is the industrial carbon tax. So can you explain how the carbon tax will be implemented and how this impacts our competitiveness level with other nations, especially those south of the border in the U.S.?
Okay, well, first of all, let me emphasize that the study I did does not look at competitiveness in general, which depends not just on taxation, but it depends on other things as well, like the quality of your resource and the cost of getting it to market, and also even things like wage rates can make a difference across jurisdictions and things like that. But I've always been interested in the tax competitiveness issue with carbon taxation, because carbon taxation raises the cost of energy, and of course that could have effect on the cost of doing business, especially when you're looking at the impact on production. And for years, myself, as well as many others, we have looked at international tax competitiveness for Canada, including the Department of Finance in Ottawa, where calculations are made and, to compare, various industries, with the United States and other countries. And one thing that we've never included in analysis is the impact of carbon taxation, in which you have to look at it not just in terms of the tax on capital, which is a kind of a separate thing. You have to look at it also in terms of the tax on energy. And when you're producing something, you have to use energy, you have to use capital, you have to use labor. And so you try to aggregate up all these different taxes and look at the impact on the cost of doing business, or what I call the marginal cost of production. And of course, the more taxation there is, the less incentive to produce in an economy. And what the study shows is that without the carbon tax that has been brought in the past several years, not just the recent one, Canada actually, or at least Alberta, was actually pretty tax competitive relative to Texas and New Mexico with respect to oil, gas, and power investments. And that may be a bit surprising to some, but we have to remember, Alberta has a relatively low corporate income tax rate at the provincial level. Plus, it also has, a very well-developed royalty system for taxing oil and natural gas. And it also has relatively low fuel taxes as well. And when you look at Texas and New Mexico, well, the corporate income tax rate is even a little bit lower in Texas. But Texas also has all sorts of other taxes, like the gross receipts tax, and there's retail sales taxes that affect capital expenses and things like that. So all that is incorporated in the analysis, and what we show is that actually Alberta is pretty tax competitive from that perspective. But once I put in the carbon tax, the industrial carbon tax, then I forgot to mention, actually, there's one that is not tax competitive, and that is investments in crude oil production, conventional crude. Oil sands, yes, but not conventional crude. Natural gas is competitive in taxation, and so is power. But when you get to the adding in the carbon tax, conventional crude is even more or even less tax competitive. But oil sands loses most of its tax advantage that it did have, as well as natural gas losing some of its advantage. But power becomes also disadvantaged investments in Alberta compared to Texas, particularly. And so that's kind of what the study kind of showed, is that as we keep raising carbon taxes, you actually put Alberta more and more offside. And we did look at the MOU, which everyone talks about, and the new scheme in terms of raising carbon taxes from currently $95 per ton, up to $140 per ton by 2040. And discounting things back to the current year for inflation, just to adjust it in real terms, what we found actually is that lo and behold, actually things are even going to get worse, and just about all the sectors are going to be tax disadvantaged. Partly not just because of the carbon tax going up, but also the MOU includes a minimum now price for what are called carbon credits, which can be used to satisfy the companies that have too many emissions. They can use carbon credits to satisfy that, but they're going to go up in price from about $40 to up to $110. That's a big hike. Plus, there's even more stringency in the sense that fewer allowances are going to be given over time. So putting that all together, the MOU will lead to Alberta losing even further its tax advantage, and in fact reversing it entirely, where it will become less tax competitive. And so if there's going to be more investment in Alberta, it's going to be for other reasons.
Okay, and there are some politicians, including Nathan Newdorf, who is the MLA for Lethbridge East, where I am, and he's also Alberta's former Minister of Affordability and Utilities. He has brought up that there's two ways to look at this. So arguing that with our carbon credit trading system, it really works out to a lower rate of around $95 per ton, and sometimes even lower than that. So how true is that, and how much of a difference does that make?
Well, actually, I did a little calculation, which is kind of interesting. What we know is that from the data that we had available to us, that about 1/3 of emissions today, roughly, is satisfied by using the credit, the carbon credit. 2/3 companies paying at $95, and carbon credits on average were about $40 per ton in 2025. So, uh, so you can think of the average being around $75 as a carbon tax once you take into account the lower credit price.
Mm.
Um, we did a calculation of what would happen if you moved up to $170 and you had still the credit price at around $40. It's just an assumption. And actually, it turns out that the cost, the carbon tax would rise to about $130 from 75. So that's a pretty large hike in that sense. Then I actually looked at what the MOU does, and very interestingly, the carbon tax is $140. Credit price, minimum credit price is $110. That averages out to $130. So effectively, the MOU's effective carbon price is going to be, leaving aside the fact that there's going to be fewer allowances permitted, but the effective carbon price is going to be basically the same as under the original plan of the carbon price going up to $170, but with a much freer approach with respect to the credit price and or the carbon credits that can be used to for companies to satisfy their emission regulations. So this is this is actually kind of interesting. The big difference, of course, is that the old plan would have had that price rising to $130 roughly by 2030, as opposed to the MOU, which it will take until another 10 years to 2040. So in that sense, it's a little bit it's better for the industry compared to what was the original plan under the Trudeau government.
Yeah, I think where they were getting that math was from the effective carbon price at 130 per ton by 2030. And then when the carbon credits currently trade for $35, then that's where that $95 per ton comes from. But you're saying it might be all the way up to 170 instead of 130.
Well, the original plan was $170 by 2030. Well, it's
Okay.
$95 in 2025. If the carbon credit price remained roughly $40 as it was in 2025 on average,
Right.
then the average credit price or the average carbon tax rate would have gone up, assuming the same 2/3, 1/3 calculation, would have gone up in 2030 to $110, which is a pretty big hike from 75. Um, while the MOU is actually going to do the same thing, the same price, bringing it up to $130 on average. But it'll take until 2040 as opposed to 2030, assuming the credits are roughly one third of the requirements that companies pay in order to satisfy the carbon tax regulation.
Yeah. Looks like the study notes that the industrial carbon tax will have a significant impact on Alberta's electricity production. So, why is that, and what effect will this have on our provincial economy?
Well, actually, that's a pretty important result in the study because everyone always keeps talking about oil sands. In fact, the big focus is on oil sands, which is understandable because it's such a huge resource that's available for development. But we also have to remember that power is very important. Businesses need power in order to, electricity to do all sorts of things, including even new data centers, et cetera.
Yeah.
And of course,
Yeah,
consumers.
we don't get very far without it, do we?
Yeah. And consumers also need power in order to, in some cases heat their homes, in other cases turning on the lights, etc. So, electricity is really important to the whole economy. And if the cost of production goes up, the marginal cost of production goes up, that's going to that's going to cause electricity prices to rise. And of course, that feeds right through the whole economy, not just consumers, but also businesses that buy electricity on the market are going to be facing higher costs as well. And so that's a pretty significant issue. And the reason our numbers show such a large impact on the power industry is in part because of the fact that there are much fewer free allowances given to the industry under the current approach, partly because a lot of companies like ATCO and others have switched to renewables to instead of natural gas, but still natural gas plays a big role in power production. But also natural gas is a pretty important part of their costs, and so even compared to, let's say, an oil sand plant, it's producing energy, but it's also consuming energy in order to produce oil. So, but in the case of power, actually, energy is a bigger weight, in other words, of their costs compared to oil sands and conventional oil and natural gas. And so, therefore, the hit of the industrial carbon tax is much heavier on the power industry compared to other industries. And so we found that there's a pretty significant increase in the effective tax rate on costs associated with the carbon tax.
Wow. I have so many more questions for you, but unfortunately, we are at our time here, Dr. Mintz. But great to have you on. Thanks so much for sharing your expertise with us today.
My pleasure.
Dr. Jack Mintz is an economist at the University of Calgary's School of Public Policy.